Hi, and welcome to this screencast. We're going to actually primarily be talking about social cognitive perspective, but what I'd like to do is show you a comparison between these two perspectives that we've most recently read about. Social cognitive perspective is associated with Albert Bandura, Julian Rotter, and what it really is, in many ways, is a combination of cognitive and behavioral psychology. So therefore, learning principles connected to classical conditioning and operant conditioning are going to play a pretty pivotal role, not as pivotal in straight up behaviorism. So there's going to be more leeway. Bandura is less deterministic than Skinner. He sees us interacting with the environment where Skinner saw the environment acting on us. So Bandura is going to see more of a reciprocal relationship. They're also interested in how personality develops from an interplay of multiple factors, three factors that they kind of whittle it down to. The trait perspective, on the other hand, is about measuring traits, I think psychometrics. And then it wants to try to identify the number of traits that make up personality, right? Can we whittle it down to 5? That's the BFI, right? And then they want to see how those traits influence behavior and whether or not they can predict behavior. All right, but we're going to primarily focus on the social cognitive theory. And I said earlier, it's really about personality developing and being shaped by, because they're really influenced by learning theory, right? Behaviorism. So these are your three factors. So you got to make sure you have these three. Now, cognitive factors, some books call that purple factor, personal factors. And what that is made up of are people's beliefs. Expectations. Now remember, expectations can be connected to learning, and they make room for traits or dispositions. So they make room and allowances for traits. So you can see they're already expanding going beyond what Skinner would have said, right? Skinner really wouldn't have made much room for beliefs, right? So he would have just seen beliefs being the product of operant conditioning. And then obviously behavior. So this is a really cool process. All three of these are going to be interacting with each other to develop and to reinforce and to even cause change within the person. All right? So obviously our personality has to do with evaluating, interpreting, and organizing information in terms of the world, right? Characteristic ways of thinking, knowing, and acting and feeling. So you can see that they're trying to say, the social cognitive folks, that these three factors basically help to explain why people are the way they are. All right, so let's just go and define, first of all, how they describe personality, the social cognitive. This is just social cognitive. This is what they're talking about here, that basically we're the sum, we are constituted by behaviors and cognitive habits. So you could think, if you want to make this less abstract, some people just tend to be more negative than others, and even in their thinking, not just in their behaviors, or not just in what they express. You know, they may express a lot of never things, like this never happens for me, good things never occur, I won't get this. But we also think they're thinking that a lot, right? And that will affect their behavior, obviously. Now, I want to show you the formal definition of personality that you learned way back a week ago in Myers. I want you to understand the connection here. Social cognitive folks are trying to explain this definition. So it's not as if they're rejecting it. It's not as if we have two completely separate definitions and descriptions of personality. But what the social cognitive folks are doing, they're trying to apply behavioral and cognitive psychology as an explanation for why individuals may sometimes have characteristic patterns of thinking, knowing, feeling, and acting. So for instance, they might use the concept of reinforcement to explain a characteristic way of acting in the world. Okay, so they're really trying to explain how personality develops. Now, we talked about the influence of these three factors. Now, the influence of these three factors on the personality is what Bandura called reciprocal determinism, right? So he's saying this influences personality, it influences future behavior, right? So he really sees reciprocal determinism as a very dynamic process that influences how we are in the world. So let's give you an example. at its most simple, this is what it is, right? It's the idea that the environment influences how we think and feel, and then that influences our behavior, how we think and feel in the environment, and then how we act in an environment can change that environment, and then those changes in the environment can reinforce or change the way we think and feel, which then can influence our behavior. So you could see it's this like feedback loop. Let's give you a more specific example. We got our 3 factors, so we're going to go to town with these 3 factors. All right, so again, you got to keep in mind that this would be the personal factor, right? Let's take the example of Donnie. Donnie doesn't believe that he has the ability, that's a personal cognitive factor, it's a cognition, to handle college, so he doesn't go. That's a behavior. So we can see reciprocal determinism in real life here. We can see how thoughts influence behavior. And then not being in college, well, maybe he's got to get a job. That's going to influence his environment. And then depending on what he finds at that job, right, in that job, the people he meets can further influence how he thinks about his abilities and the behavior. So it's going to be this loop that's going to continue to either reinforce or potentially change Donnie. Now, let's look at Phil. And Phil is a hostile human being. And this is actually accurate. There are people who have a tendency towards hostile thinking. So let's just say his personal factor, right? We're talking about a cognition. He has a tendency for hostile thinking. Well, that can lead to hostile behavior. And then we see Phil doesn't live in a bubble. He's around other people. His hostile behavior affects other people. And it changes the environment, right? People don't like to be around other hostile people, so the environment can become threatening, right? So you could see how Phil's cognitive inclination for hostile thinking affects his behavior. He's more likely to act hostile to other human beings, and that behavior influences the environment. It also influences the type of behavior he's going to receive from other people. So it's just like this negative feedback. So he is much more likely to be in confrontations because of just the way he thinks. And his thinking leads to a behavior. His behavior has consequences on the environment. Those consequences in the environment can reinforce his hostile thinking. So that's really how reciprocal determinism can work. There can be positive cases too with it, but that's our introduction to social cognitive perspective and reciprocal determinism.